prison, and grave.
And we're on the air with wire106, season 3, episode 6. We're up to now?
6, can you believe it?
Yeah.
Do a little math here, because I'm big on math, especially after that science teaching radio show last night. I could do a lot of math and nano stuff. How many episodes have the students in this class watched so far?
A lot.
Yeah.
Not very good math, Sydney.
Yeah. I think.
What is it? Like 11 to 12 in the first season?
13.
13, okay. And then second season,
12.
12?
Yeah.
So at 25. And then 31?
31, yeah.
32 at the end of this week.
32. So 31 hours of just watching.
At least it's a good show. Yeah. It's not like we're struggling.
The countless hours now you spend on creating. When is the DS106 Wire 106 revolt going to happen? Come on, guys, organize.
Once we get our grade.
The power. This is a great moment. Take back the streets.
Nah, it's teaching you some good multitasking skills. I've had like the episode going on half my screen and then creating something on the other half of my screen.
Well, listen, I'm all for a revolt. Right, so we are 31 episodes in, and I applaud every single one of you for keeping up. Let's talk a little bit about this episode. We have the first thing queued up, which is actually a video from the opening scene. And the opening scene, anyone want to set the stage with the opening scene?
So Major Colvin has decided that they're going to come down on the dealers and do whatever it takes to convince them to go to Amsterdam.
Yeah, so here's what we got. And it's pretty brutal, the methods. And here's one of them. Let's go with it.
Come on, sweetheart. Push your ass out of here. Still Maryland. But if y'all don't take that shit down to Amsterdam tomorrow, next time it's gonna be West Virginia.
That little star right there across from the Dipper, that's north.
You wanna go the other way.
Asshole.
I think my favorite part of that scene, hold on, sorry. I think my favorite part of that scene is that last little assholes. It's so believable. Assholes.
Yeah. So yeah, they took some people off the corner and threw their sneakers down into the sewer. They threw some other guys in the back of a truck and filled it with pepper spray, and they brought these guys out to who knows where.
Don't forget about baby cakes.
Oh yeah,
The car baby cakes.
That's right. It's funny you guys should mention that. I have those images up because I was really struck by the beginning too.
Yeah, I was.
Kirk and baby cakes was he was facing off with the other guy, and here it is. And it was interesting to me because Herc was in the same position last episode with Marla. Like constantly, his idea of policing is constantly being in someone's face. And it's just a really different approach than we might think that someone like Colvin's trying to kind of cultivate, which is actually bring the community back in, community policing. But he's constantly in people's face. The other image, which I was interested in, let me see if I can find it quickly. Yeah, here it is. What did you guys make of this image? This image I thought was pretty insane. And just as a kind of moment that captures what we talked about with the shoes. That image. Like, what does that make you think about? For me, it was like, where are we? Are we in America? Are we in some abject world that's alternative, this dystopia. Like, what a crazy image with the kind of asphalt, the feet, and then you kind of pan up to see those white sneakers being thrown in the sewer. I mean, it was a pretty disturbing image in some ways.
Yeah.
Yeah, but one of the pictures I was going to show was right after the first clip that you showed, where the van is driving away and then the men are just standing there. And I'm in this American Society sociology class, and one of the things we talk about is like how America is sometimes so different than what people think it is. Like, right, the whole first scene is all about like police brutality, and like they really have no regard for like those humans. Like they're other people. Just because they break the law doesn't mean that you can degrade them and take their things and leave them in the woods. And it was just very interesting to see that.
Yeah. Another thing that struck me about that image, because it's funny enough, Sid, I didn't get the first part, but I got that same image, and I just put it up. But the idea of the woods or the wilderness in The Wire is such a different space. Like we saw Wallace early on go out to the country, and we actually see all of them go out to the wild. And it almost reminds me of Nathaniel Hawthorne. Like the idea that to go out into the wilderness is to go into this other alternative space that's completely uncomfortable and is completely compromising. And it's so like ulterior to this notion of the city that the actual divide that happened in early America between like the establishment and the colony and the wilderness is in some weird way reinforced here. That they're out in this space that's completely unfamiliar. They're terrified, just like Wallace was. And what we think of terrifying, Amsterdam, is home. There's this completely inverted sense of the country and its kind of comfort for this community that I found compelling.
Yeah, for that scene when they were dropped off in the woods, I was watching with one of my roommates, and we were actually like, we just started cracking up. We thought it was so funny because obviously, like back to when they went to Philadelphia, the one guy back in the couple of seasons back, he didn't even know there was another radio station besides the one he listened to. And so when we saw this, like we were only imagining, like I wish they would have shown a clip of them trying to get back to Baltimore, because I think it would have been really like interesting what their thought process was, whether they tried to do something like criminally, maybe like steal a car or something, or they maybe actually like just try to walk back because they were so out of their element that they just were so confused as to what to do. But no, I just thought it was funny how like the cops did that, and I mean I don't think that ever. I hope that never happened, because that's a big way to set your foot, basically telling them what to do.
Even the joking with the North Star.
Yeah.
Like it gets to your point, Sid, that you mentioned last night, you mentioned again today. It's like this implications of early American, Native Americans, slaves. Like there's a part of early American history embedded in that moment that you don't think about too much, but the power relations and the dehumanization, as much as it's somewhat comic, part of its comedy depends upon this really kind of visceral notions of space and how different they are. But it is a compelling moment.
Do you think the producers like thought about that when they did it, or do you think it just happened? Like, do you think they try to put that in to like get like the background thought going, or do you think they just were like they just had it happen and then it just kind of fit in?
Well, it's funny. We could probably count the times we have a country setting like that on one hand.
Yeah.
While maybe Bodie when he's walking back from escaping from the juvenile detention.
Yeah.
This one. And so you have to think, and this is my opinion, I don't know if it's true, that there's a certain amount of intentionality on the part of the producers and the creators to think about, like with Bodie with the radio station, like you said. There is a real reinforcement of this notion of their worlds are so defined and so prescribed that to move outside of them is it's a cognitive dissonance upon ideas of identity, who they are, where they are. And so I think, yes, I think there is a certain amount of that beyond the comedy. I would even argue, and I know I should shut up, but I won't. I would even argue that Simon talks a lot about the influence of the West in previous episodes, like the Western movies like The Searchers or The Wild Bunch and stuff like that. Well, I think this is a real kind of motif of the wilderness and these notions of captivity narratives and a whole kind of frame of early American culture that I don't think if you're following Westerns and thinking about alternative ideas of kind of narrative and of heroism and of violence in American culture, then it would be hard to ignore a whole, we've all read Nathaniel Hawthorne as a culture pretty much, not maybe every individual, but this notion of the early notions of wilderness is not a kind of new theme that Simon came up with. It's one we've been schooled in: man versus nature, notions of community, notions of the devil, notions of religion, notions of race, notions of the other. This is not new stuff, and the fact that it would be embedded intentionally in The Wire would not surprise me at all. That's my answer. Good day. What next? I'll be your DJ or VJ or whatever you want to call it.
Well, let's go to the epigraph since we're at the beginning.
Absolutely. Okay. So the epigraph spoken by Barksdale, right? Avon?
Yeah.
Back in the mix now. Back in the game. And here we go.
Yeah, just a gangster, I suppose. And so he's talking about, we see this in the last episode and this one as well, that, there's a divide between Stringer and Barksdale, that Stringer's moving away from the streets and Avon can't. And that's what that's speaking to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it kind of defines these last two episodes, like him coming back into the culture and then him just wanting to get back and fight for corners and go head-to-head with Marlowe. Like, that's the game.
Yeah. And the title of the episode is Homecoming, so, yeah.
Yeah, the divide between the two is it's pretty prevalent in each of the episodes now, and you can see that they're trying to make it together, but I'm interested to see what are they about to go about doing at some point where I feel like some point they're going to butt heads and something big's going to happen, and it's almost like you got one big company working together with two separate divisions. You got Avon doing the drug side, and then you got Stringer trying to make it like a real company with having real assets that you really can't get screwed over. You can get screwed over, but not as easy as a drug, corporations. I'm interested to see how they split off, or if they do split off, or if they just try to stay together the whole time.
That's a good point.
Yeah, and
I'm sorry.
to me, Avon is more like an impulse thinker. He's like, oh, something happened, we have to react right away. Whereas Stringer's like, no, let's take a step back. Let's see how it plays out. Let's keep it cool. We don't want to get in trouble, that kind of thing. So I think Avon's gotten a little hot-headed. We need to react all the time, right now.
Yeah, and that's that notion of the soldier versus the businessman coming out,
Yeah.
right? And the evolution, or lack thereof. It reminded me of this scene, what you're both saying, is here's a scene when they're all they're talking about the corners. And
Yes.
I just love the framing of this. You have Avon and Little Man up front. Is that his name, Little Man?
No, he's Slim Charles.
Slim
Yeah.
Charles, yeah.
And then you have in the back, you have Stringer, and constantly there's this triangulated tension. And, he's like, I think Barksdale says at some point, be quiet, let him talk, he's a soldier, he knows, right? There's this notion of Stringer, shut up, you're just a businessman now, you're irrelevant in this regard. And that's what you're talking about. It's absolutely embedded in the visual, too.
Yeah, that divide.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Travis.
All right, I was just saying
there is that divide between Avon and Stringer, where Stringer has become more of the business side and hasn't really been on the streets as much as Avon. So they both have things to share, but they both only want it their way. They're not really seeing it from the other point of view.
Yeah, and like with Stringer and Avon, like Sid said, Avon's very like impulsive about doing it. I think they could work well together because if you have like that business mind um, that Stringer has right now, he can be smart about when they do get the money, how they're gonna like liquidate it. I don't know if you guys watched Breaking Bad, but how he got all that money and they had to figure a way like how they're gonna actually be able to walk around spending it. Whereas obviously Avon and them, they spend it they live a pretty good life. But I think they could work together well, but they're so hard-headed in their ways that I just don't see this team staying together nicely.
Plus, there's some tensions there about what exactly Stringer Bell did to Avon's cousin,
Yeah.
Angelo. Like, there's also some tension that Stringer Bell, he's not all business. He's been cutting throats in his own regard. So there's that kind of plays out in this season. That's interesting.
Yeah, or Stringer's sort of taken to a place where they're making money and not having to do what Avon is used to. I don't think Avon's got his head around that.
Mm-hmm.
And when he's in that situation, he's like, I don't got time for you. Like, I don't want to talk about how late you are on this delivery or anything like that. Like, I just want to be in the streets, get my corners. So there's a complete disconnect.
Yeah.
Okay, what next? I see we got ones. A few people have one with Bunk and Omar. You want to talk about that with Bunk and Omar? Okay, I'm going to bring up your image, Sid, and then you can start us off on this conversation. Make sense? Okay, give me a second. Okay, here we go. Bunk and Omar. This is one of the more famous scenes, I think, in the series.
So I chose this image because of the conversation that went around went along with it. Bunk is kind of telling Omar like, "Hey, we came from the same place," but then you look at them and they're completely different. Bunk is very professional with his police badge, and then Omar's just kind of sitting there like he spits, and then the spit just kind of like hangs off of his chin, and they're just two completely different people. Yet they came from the same city. They like grew up in the same environment, and it just shows you that even if you grew up in the same place, like you can have totally different futures. And I thought it was really interesting to see, like, I don't really think that many of the police officers or the homicide unit like actually try to relate to them or to relate to any of the like Barksdale crew or anything. So I thought this part was really interesting.
Yeah, like they went to the same school, I think they were saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. One of the things that compelled me about this scene was, they also talked about, like, interestingly enough, Bunk talked about being protected by some of the really hard people, like Omar, and how appreciative he was, but also how that sense of community and protection and this kind of tight-knit space, which actually Omar is the closest connection to in the whole kind of street world.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like Bunk knew how to play on. And if Bunk knew that he was pissed at Omar, he's pissed that Omar became this superhero and this model, but it's almost as if Omar was the one person in this whole world who he could even talk to like this. Which is this weird kind of two parts to it where Omar, as you see, is deeply affected by this conversation. But it's this weird moment where, like, Bunk seems to be oddly on the other side at this moment in some weird humanizing way, which I thought was really powerful.
Yeah, I mean, like what Sid said about growing up in the same neighborhood and whatnot. My dad grew up right on the outskirts of Baltimore City, and he told me stories of, he went to very rough public schools his whole life, and he was telling me stories how I'd ask about his buddies, and he'd be like, oh yeah, that one's in prison, this one I lost contact with, like all of his friends that he was so tight with and would hang out in the alleys playing baseball and whatnot now are just basically nothing that he knows of, and whereas my dad took that and made it into something, so just going back to like Sid said is you can grow up in the same area and it's just which path you take and how you go about it.
Yeah, it's an interesting scene, and this kind of glue between them, like you're talking about, is the sense of community, and it seems to be what's lost here in our contemporary moment is any sense of community, right? Like even this notion of Baltimore that they both grew up in is lost. Like that's a lost world based on where they are now. So there's this real deep nostalgia and sense of loss that I think both of them share. It's not like just Bunk. Like Omar seems to deeply agree with that loss, to the fact that he's feeling really guilty.
Yeah, like I think the last picture of Omar we saw in that scene when he had the spit hanging, um, to me it looked like he was almost holding back tears.
Yeah.
He was still trying to stay tough guy, don't mess with me type of thing. But having that spit hanging and not caring to wipe it, and like just the look in his eyes. I thought he could have easily had a tear like drop down the side of it in that scene.
Yeah, and I love how aggressive Bunk is, and this is a shot that you shared, Paul. The one
Yeah.
thing I'll also mention about this scene is the setting. Like it really looks like something out of a Sergio Leone, the famous kind of spaghetti.
Yeah, yeah, there's a very Western look to it, like I'm trying to place it, in another movie.
Well, you could place it in Once Upon a Time in the West when they start out at this abandoned train station. You really get the sense that here they are at that abandoned train station in the middle of nowhere, and it's like Baltimore has become the Wild West. And right, that's the notion of this notion of, you know, you go out, the kind of gunslingers, there's a certain amount of stabilization with their fight with authority, and then a community and families and all that come in. It's the way we move west. And it seems like downtown Baltimore, at least West Baltimore, is the Wild West again. And there's this impulse to kind of bring back community and like here's the law and the bandits kind of reliving a very classic Western scene, right? So it's amazing how brilliantly they capture that in the scene.
Well, and it's even like the gold rush. Like you're moving all these, like all the cowboys and everything back then, they were, moving west to go get gold and go get profit, and now they're moving these drug dealers to go to Amsterdam to go get profit. So it like kind of parallels that as well.
Absolutely. I mean, the notions of space in the inner city and how gutted they are and how they feel like the Wild West in these moments are really powerful. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've never seen an area that was as abandoned as Amsterdam was, but that's probably because I've been told not to drive down in those areas by my parents. But like even like other parts of Baltimore, like there are so many townhomes just one after another that are just boarded up, and then right next to it you have a nice house with nice flowers out front, and it's just like such a different world that they are so used to that we just look at it as like what's going on, like what is that?
I'll tell you, you actually bring up a really good point, Travis, and it's one of the things in this episode that really struck me, and it actually builds on what we're saying right now, so I just want to bring it up, is right after we have that early scene when they're out in the woods, right, we cut to this montage of the community of West Baltimore that's never looked better.
Yeah, I was actually going to share that exact picture.
Yeah, it's just like what you said, right? Like,
yeah,
and there's a bunch of images you could take from that, and that's actually like once the cowboys and the villains are pushed out, you're actually able to have a sense of community again, with all the joy potentially, and got its own problems that come with it. And so it was a remarkable moment in The Wire to see an alternative possibility. We talk about these two alternatives of Omar and Bunk. Well, here's two alternative possibilities of the actual community.
Yeah.
I'll shut up. No. Tell me what. How about We Straight? I'm going to put the We Straight image up, and you could talk about this one, Sid, because you included it. And I figure what we think about this.
Oh. Yeah, well, the image I put before that was when Sorry, Chitty?
Let me get
Is
it.
that his
I'll
name?
bring it up. Which one?
I think is it Cuddy?
The
Is that
one
what
where
he's saying?
he's holding the gun.
Oh.
Oh, that's right.
Putty,
Okay, yeah.
that's what it is.
Got it. I'll bring it up right now. Perfect. Recall. Okay, yeah. Cuddy holding the gun.
Yes.
Got it.
Okay, yeah. So I chose this one because I just thought it was like such a turning point in the show because, usually they don't hesitate. Like the Marlowe's sitting on the ground right there, like totally defenseless, helpless, and he could have shot him and that could have been the end, but he stopped, he hesitated and let him get away. And then the next picture I have is of Avon like dapping him up, like saying, "It's all right, like you don't want to be part of it, that's okay." But then after the picture of them like giving each other hugs, like kind of in the back of my mind, I was wondering, like, is it really okay? Like, because of what we've seen with Frank and other people, like, is it really? What's gonna happen next? Like, are they gonna go after him? Type of thing.
Yeah, especially with like with Wallace. Wallace was a young kid, and you can always scare that boy to not say anything. He was so young and just scared of everything. Whereas this, Chitty or Cuddy, he's so much older. But like at that picture, like I didn't think of it at first, but when he's about to shoot Marlowe, like if you look at what he's wearing, it even kind of gives it that he's like um, past game. Like he has the hat and the glasses and the gloves. Like you don't see gangbangers in The Wire wearing that. So that I didn't notice that at first, but now that we're like talking about it, like that almost was like a foreshadow that like he was the past. Like it was. I mean, it was different back then than it is now. And so now looking at it, like it kind of I don't know maybe foreshadowed it, but I don't know. I don't think you can with this group. I don't think you can be in the game and then get out without being killed or dying.
Yeah.
He did really look. I think that's a good, like, his whole ensemble was.
I mean, it's awesome. I think I think it looks great. Like, it's a clean business, like, take care of business look, but I didn't notice it, but now thinking about it, like, maybe that they did that intentionally.
Like 1960s Lee Marvin, The Killers.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking more like Isaac Hayes, Truck Turner or something like that.
Seven.
Yeah.
Well, the other thing that was interesting to Sid's point is as soon as he says it, he's like, dude, I'm basically out of the game. I can't do this anymore. There's a real sense where he's just sitting there seeing what's going to happen. Like, he doesn't know if they're going to go after him or it's like, if that's the case, you're dead. Like, it almost like he shared that same sense of, like, uncertainty and fear that you were talking about, Sid, and ultimately it's not the case. But there's this sense for him, like, he had to do it come what may because he just didn't have it in him anymore, which is an interesting moment.
And I'm thinking maybe it has to do with what Stringer has been telling Avon, like, we don't need to do all this stuff in the streets. Like, we need to look at it from the business side and just kind of letting everyone have their own opinions or attitudes towards the whole situation. So I'm wondering if maybe, like, Avon's change of heart in that scene was as a result of Stringer's, like, their discussions in this episode.
The other thing is maybe, who knows, like, I don't know what their relationship was prior to when Cuddy was in prison. Maybe he was a big part of their organization, like, prior to his sentencing, and maybe they have, like, this friendship that Avon, doesn't want to, hurt him because they have more of a connection than they might have had with Wallace and whatnot. But, I don't know because we haven't, they didn't do a throwback or anything to that.
Well, it also gives the episode an important thematic connection between Omar's kind of moral, ethical dilemma around Bunk's notion of community and who he is in this community, and then Cuddy's ethical dilemma about who he is and his relationship to the game. And it's an episode where a lot of that stuff is coming to the head, and we didn't really see it before. Right? Like, Poot and Bodie had it to some degree with killing Wallace. I mean, how could you not? And it was probably the hardest scene to watch in The Wire yet. But most of the people who die, like we see, on a regular basis, there's really not that much visceral reaction to it. Even when the dog gets shot in the dog fighting, like usually dogs dying or animals dying is a nightmare, but this is the first time where someone actually took a moment to look at the body next to him and said, what am I doing? And stop.
Yeah. And I think it kind of goes back with Bunk and Omar's conversation where Bunk says to Omar, like, we've lost our sense of community and, like, no one cares that anyone dies. But in this scene, it's a turning point. Like, someone does care that someone died. Someone, like, it was the wrong person. They shot someone and someone died. Like, that's like, someone dying is a big thing, and everyone just kind of blows it off like, oh, it happens. But I think maybe now everyone will start to care more. I don't know. Hopefully.
Yeah, it's a really good reading of that, and it's like there's a world beyond the game. The other thing, like everything gets explained away with that idea of it's all in the game, and the all in game becomes a kind of cop out. And here's a moment where it's not enough, and there has to be some accountability on the part of the people playing the game.
I was thinking that situation between Avon and Cuddy, that Avon recognizes Cuddy as a soldier.
Yeah.
And he's letting him out of the game, like, out of respect, but it's partly, I think, he's not, like, winning the game. He's not walking out a king, but he's walking out alive, and maybe that's giving Avon a sense of hope there, too.
Is it in this episode, and this is something I'd like to do with as an assignment for DS106 or something, but like where Avon's going through all the potential muscle, and they're like, what about this guy? No, he's, with the Dominicans. What about this guy? He went straight. What about this guy? And like there's this list of people who are muscle that he needs because they have to go battle Marlowe. And all those great names and all those small stories about all these basically, like, you can think of them as Jesse James or other kind of like hired guns that are out of the game. And it was just a cool moment, like with all these identities that are out there and listed, and then probably knowing Simon has some real life correlation are just thrown out there. And it's a whole world that we just get in a couple of lines. So cool. Right. What next? I will share your shots. You want to share one with us, Travis, that you have?
Yeah, I'll share one. Let me go ahead and make sure I get it up first. I think this I had to share because of our radio show that we did. So here it is. Can everyone see that? The picture of
Yeah. Bubbles.
Bubbles with the hats, not the hats, the white T-shirts. When I saw this, well, one, because of the show, we discussed, like, we actually brought up prior to watching this if Bubbles should decide to stay a CI for the police officers or not, like full time. And I think it was the episode before this, or maybe one or two before, is when he first started to, like, actually, I think got like $5, like every good thing, and he actually started trying to sell his information. He actually started playing more of like a business side, like he'd hold off on information, and then when she'd ask for more, he'd be like, well, yeah, I got some more, but you got to cough up some more money. And then he had her bank, I think, like $10 or so. She looked at him like, bank, like, usually you just take it and go buy your drugs. And then you see this, and now he's trying to use some of his money to sell white T-shirts. And I can't remember the exact reasoning he said, but I know it had something to do with like the gangbangers like needing to switch shirts quickly, or just change shirts often. And I don't know, maybe it's a change for Bubbles, and maybe he's gonna play the CI side the rest of the way, or maybe it's just kind of a way of, I need to get more money, so I'm gonna try to do like two things at once.
Yeah, I think you guys did a great job with Bubbles in the radio show. And there's a lot to be said about that. What struck me about Bubbles in this scene is the way he wears the whitey shirt on his head.
Yeah.
He's in the Middle East, right?
Yeah.
And he makes an offhanded reference to the fact that Marlowe and Yvonne Boxdale's crew are battling like it's Baghdad. And there's that moment too where Bubbles becomes this, because he's such a compelling character, he becomes this like almost this translator to some of the broader issues happening and dealt with in the show. But he's such a character who's so in some ways um, he has a way with words. He's poetic. He's really smart, even if he isn't book smart. And his ability to bring you in and make that point and kind of see him there. I just love how he's this kind of like a Rosetta Stone for some of the bigger themes the writers are dealing with. When you come to Bubbles, something deep is underneath what he's saying. And I just love that about him as a fictional character created in the story. So I just wanted to do that aside. And this is a scene where it came up, and I forgot that scene until you brought it up. So I think it's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I hit in the radio show was how he doesn't come in the show often, but he's such a significant character. Like, I don't know, like, I did not notice the Baghdad reference, like, at all until you just mentioned it. And now, like, seeing it now, it's like, okay, like, yeah, like, that actually happened. Like, that's just one example of he comes in and he just has such a impact for, maybe that scene might have been, I think, like 3 minutes, if that. So very short out of the whole hour episode, and but it's such an important part to the whole series.
And I wonder if it has an animal with the feet in the shoes in the opening scene, right? Like that whole idea of West Baltimore and Baghdad.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Sid. I didn't mean to cut you off.
That's okay. Another thing about Bubbles is that he's just such a compelling character. Like when he talks or when there's scenes, like I always want to listen. Like I always pay more attention. Like one of my favorite scenes with him is from the episode that I did the gifts with when we had to do. I think it was called One Arrest, and it was where they're in the like the rehab meeting, and he just randomly stands up and decides he like wants to be clean, and he just kind of goes back and forth and does what he wants, but he's always there, and I don't know, he's my favorite character in the show just because he's only there for a little bit, but he always has something like interesting to say or interesting to do.
Yeah, I agree with you both. And another point, and I think this was in the last episode, where him and Johnny are arguing about how they're going to raise money, whether I'm going to be a CI, which directly relates to this idea of him selling shirts. But they're having this kind of larger, almost philosophical relationship about how you make money in relationship. Because is it all right to make money once you're arrested to benefit from, snitching? Or is it smarter, rather than stealing or shaking a ladder and scaring some guy off a ladder with a switch and bait and switch, what if I actually did this as a job? And it was kind of a deep philosophical question about one's relationship to what they do and why they do it. And I think it's that presence of mind Bubbles has about what he's doing and why he's doing it. Even that time when he was clean, it was like, that's a great moment of Bubbles, when he's clean in the park and he hears everything so crisply, and you have this sense of kind of self-consciousness that very few characters in this whole entire series have. Maybe the other one is Bubbles. Maybe another one is Bunk. But like, there's this notion of self-consciousness that's really hard to come by. Almost like a conscience. Anyway.
Yeah, we don't really see that with any of the other characters. They just kind of act, and it's like up to the audience, like the viewers, to figure out, well, why do I think they did that? Whereas Bubbles kind of has these side conversations with people like, oh, well, I'm going to do this because of that. Or it's kind of cool to hear like light from him.
Yeah, and I think it's one of the reasons we relate to Bubbles. Like, he is kind of a moral barometer for us. And with a show like The Wire, you need a couple. Too many Burrells and Rolleses and characters like that. And, it becomes a cartoon. Yeah, that's cool. All right, awesome. What else? I don't want this to stop.
I'll share. I got another one. Let me see if I can pull it up quickly. To go back with Avon and Stringer, how their relationship currently. this scene was, I think it was more on the earlier side of the episode, when they were talking, and at this point, I'm pretty sure Avon said something like, why aren't we buying, we don't need to buy corners or something like that, like saying like we don't need to put our money into buying it, we can just go in and muscle it. Whereas, Stringer's you can go talk to what's the other main drug dealer, the head guy, the fat, is it like
Prop Joe.
Fat Joe? Yeah, him.
Wow.
He seems like if you give him the right amount of money or you talk to him the right way, he's also a businessman. He doesn't mind getting easy money by working a deal and whatnot. So I just think it just goes back to like how different but similar minded Avon and Stringer are. Stringer is going business, but can still then be cutthroat. But he's very cutthroat under the radar. He goes through different connections to, make D'Angelo, disappear with a hard trace back to his name. Whereas Stringer, it's like if he's taking the corner, everybody knows it's him taking the corner. Like it's like a sense of wanting to be king and everyone knowing that he's king.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it kind of goes along with our radio show. Again, the question Danielle asked about what would you do if you were in the crew and people were taking over your area? Like, basically the same thing. I guess our radio show foreshadowed all of this happening. But like Travis's response was to like go in there and fight for it. And I think I said something about that too. But then there was also the side of some of our responses that was more like, oh, well, maybe we can just set it up other places. Like one of the things I mentioned was finding a new client list, like moving away from there because clearly it wasn't working. So like in our own responses in our radio show, we were kind of like toggling back and forth between a Stringer response and an Avon response to what's going on.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Paul. I didn't know if you were going to say something. But one of the things here, just I found interesting in that, like, here's what Stringer's dealing with.
Mm-hmm.
Dealing with a very different kind of corruption. And, like, this is almost legal, but, like, you have these, architects and workers basically, robbing Stringer. And then it goes all the way up to Clay Davis. Shit, I need more money. Like, you know how that goes. But it's just willing to deal with that because, I mean, in some ways, who wouldn't? Because the bottom line is getting ripped off. It's not going to prison necessarily or getting shot. It's a practical decision that makes a lot of sense. I mean, you can't really argue with Stringer. It's a kind of the smarter choice.
Yeah, it makes me think of, again, how Simon talked about being an allegory for the Iraq War and all the money that went into there that got siphoned off here and there by a lot of people who it wasn't intended to benefit,
Yeah, contractor after contractor, right? Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. What else? Other clips? Paul, you have a bunch. Anyone in particular you want to show?
Can you pull up the one about the crown?
Absolutely. All right. So here we go. And
prison and graveyard.
Did a little bit early, but I can go back to the beginning. Let me share this. All right. There we go. Here we go.
Prison and graveyards, full of boys who wore the crown.
Point is, they wore it. It's my turn to wear it now.
That really gets at what Travis was saying, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's the game, and he just wants to be the king. It makes me think, there's a parallel kind of going on there with City Hall. Carcetti's saying it's his time, and he's the insurgent there.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's kind of an opposite from Marlowe, but
I hadn't thought about that. That's actually really well put. And it reinforces the whole theme of the season of reform, insurgency. Um, and you see that Marlowe as a kind of, once you put Marlowe in that frame, like there's a lot of things that he could be understood as, like a radical conservative who's trying to preserve the nature of the game and not letting it redefine itself with executive drug co-ops meeting at the executive inn to, price fix the price of dope in West Baltimore. Like, he's actually re-inspiring it with the American dream. Like, everyone should get an opportunity. Like, it shouldn't be a fixed class system controlled by the power elite. So you can spin that in a lot of interesting ways if you think about it. Like, I hadn't thought about that till you said that, but that's well put.
Yeah, and the idea of like prisons and graveyards being full of people who tried to wear the crown, that goes back to Avon there, just out of prison, and he's like trying to get back into this fight he doesn't need to do.
Yeah. But it's worth it, right? Like for him, just like for Marlowe, like wearing the crown is worth it. And you showed a screenshot yesterday during our discussion of Avon or of Marlowe the warrior, and this idea with the big scar down his face, and behind him is all those federal row houses, and he's looking out the 1,000-yard stare. Like, in some ways, he's destined for this. Like, you can even talk about the broader Greek, because a lot of this is inframed by those Greek narratives, and destiny is bringing all of us back to a sense of, it's unavoidable where we are and where we're going. So it's interesting.
Yeah. So I got this shot here.
Okay.
And I liked it for a number of reasons. The mirroring that's going on there, and you're putting multiple views in one shot, and I just like, it's a storytelling technique that we've sort of seen over and over again. But every time it happens, I like it. But Maggie wrote something about this in her blog. Stringer in the mirror, there's that line on there, objects in the mirror may be closer than they appear, or something like that. Like saying that Stringer is closer to this business than we think he is.
I like that.
Wow.
I mean, because it's something that's not even just, oh, here's an offhanded comment. This is the case that Griggs and McNulty have been making about how close he is to the street and why they need to keep following Stringer Bell and why he'll lead them to the money and to the drugs and to the bodies. So it actually is a nice subtle capture of a broad theme leading us back to what the cops are trying to do with all this. So it's powerful even in that.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the things I wanted to bring up, and I didn't find a picture to necessarily go along with this, is it kind of seems like the Barksdale crew is looking for more of a long-term fix, whereas the police unit is just doing like short-term fixes, like just moving people over somewhere else. Like, that's not going to solve the drug problem. It's just going to move it around, and it's they have to actually do something rather than just move them to a whole city where they can just illegally trade drugs. But the Barksdale crew is like looking for things to do, like like Stringer, like he wants to set up all of these different places and have like a completely organized plan. So I think that's like interesting, the contrast, because usually it's the opposite, like the government's trying to find a long-term solution to a problem, whereas the people of like usually citizens are more looking at like short-term.
What's interesting there too is in that previous scene we just saw, Stringer is talking to Bodie in Amsterdam, and he's struck by what he's seeing. And there's that parallel between Stringer, and you brought this up yesterday, Paul, between Stringer and Buddy Colvin is trying to be reformists, reforming the way that they're going about their drug business and reforming the way they're going about how they manage drugs in the city. And I want to personally believe that there's something to Buddy Colvin's madness, that like if we legalize drugs as a culture and we kind of demilitarized how we kind of manage and maintain that we could see more community in certain communities and more sense of like, I actually don't think Bunny Colvin's vision is wrong, but how do you institute such a vision in a culture that's completely unwilling to understand, accept, and embrace a change based on the militaristic state of drug war, right? So it's an interesting question because neither Stringer nor Colvin are crazy. They're just completely challenging the common logic of the time. And that, I guess, what folks who wrote the show would call the institutional logic of The Wire. So it's really compelling stuff. And, you know, this is when The Wire gets good. When you all start like locking in and seeing that this is a universe of themes, of possibilities, of a kind of contemplation on this thing called America as an experiment in both its awesomeness and its deep sadness and problems. Like it's a great thing to kind of engage Wire on this level. So very cool.
Yeah.
Travis, do we anything else you want to share?
No, I think it's wild how like you can watch an episode and you can be like, oh man, that was a really good episode, and then you go watch the next one because like I usually tend to binge watch on Mondays because that's like my day of kind of easing back into school, so I'll watch like all 3 episodes on that day. So like watch them all and like I'll be like, oh, those are really good. But then like until I start sitting down like this and like actually doing assignments for it, like there's so much more to episodes that like I feel like it's in all series, like not even just The Wire. Like there's so much like tiny details that we don't notice, not everyone notices because you're not looking for them. That then you go and you start talking with other people who also watched it, and it's like they point things out, like Paul pointing out the car mirrors saying, you know, objects are closer than they appear, like just things like that. Like you hope, like I don't think that just coincidentally happened. Like that's too good of a thing to just happen. But you know, just things like that, just little things that come out when you start having a discussion about it. It just makes an episode so much more like has so much more meat to it than just what you're watching.
Yeah, and
it's like when you find out that Saturday morning cartoon shows are like made for adults and have like those sexual innuendos things. And one of the things I noticed a lot when we were supposed to take the screenshots for today was that almost every single scene was carefully like constructed so that if you were to take a screenshot, it would turn out like a really cool picture. Like in Paul's pictures and some of the pictures I have, like it could be a picture and you wouldn't guess that it was from a TV show if you didn't know, which I thought was really cool.
Yeah, the artistry of the whole.
Yeah.
That's something that I got from Sidney Lumet's book about making movies, that any scene you look at, any picture, it's all carefully designed. Every little detail in there, someone thought about it.
Yeah.
The clothes they're wearing, the color of the wall, you know.
Which is what really is why I'm really enjoying this close analysis of The Wire alongside the art creation. Is because it actually is a reminder, like you were saying, Travis, and what you're saying, Sid, is that these details matter in the experience, even if we think we miss it. They actually inform how we understand it, and to slow down and study it is the ability to turn around and try and create it. Like the two go hand in hand, and it's not like you have to only do one to do the other, but it's a constant dialogic process of creation. Watching how great people do it, and then mimic them, and then going back with them and playing with them. It's what Simon and the writers and the filmers are talking about what they do with the Western films that came before them. They're playing off of those pieces, and they're responding to them. And it's that dialogue of the whole thing that, to me, is what's compelling about culture. Whether it be The Wire or literature or film, I don't care what it is, or Saturday morning cartoons, right? Like, I think SpongeBob is amazing because it's constantly doing that. Adventure Time, the regular show, they're constantly playing with these illusions and notions of culture, and that's part of why they're compelling and engaging.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Travis, Sid, that was amazing. Thanks for taking the time to sit down. So you guys are on a roll.
We are.
You line them up, you knock them back one by one. Awesome. Great discussion, guys. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See you guys again as a team, a discussion team.
Yeah, we'll plan something now.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Take care, guys.
Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.